Okay, we are live. I've got to figure out how to share this link on Twitter. Probably should have figured that out beforehand. Okay, yes, we are live. I am sharing this link on Twitter. Yes, we are live. I am sharing this link on Twitter. Yes, we are live. I am sharing this link on Twitter.
Yeah, you got it.
There we go. All right, fix those technical issues. Thanks for joining me, Darren. The point of this Periscope, my first Periscope, by the way, big event. I want to talk a little bit about your theory, Darren, that you explained a while back on Tucker that you've been covering at Revolver News, which is the theory that you call color revolutions. And you obviously, I'll ask you to explain it in a little bit, but your theory, to sum up, I think, is that there's a huge elite-led coup against the president happening right now. And as you know, I'm very interested in tech censorship,
right?
And because technology, which online technology was supposed to open up a new frontier of freedom, has instead become the most tyrannical force you can imagine. Right. Giving it unprecedented control over the flow of information, and unprecedented ability to target undecided voters, to manipulate people's political opinions, to turn down the volume on entire political movements. So what I want to ask you, Darren, is how does big tech censorship fit into your theory of color revolutions? How does this change things?
That's a great question. First of all, there's an echo.
There is an echo.
Yeah, there's an
echo. I will try and fix that. You give me 1 second. I'm going to find some headphones.
All right.
Yes, I am a boomer. You're right. Okay, we are back. We have headphones.
Great.
Tell me if the echo is fixed. Is that better?
Let's see. So I'll just start answering your question. But before I answer your excellent question, I would like to say congratulations on your Tucker appearance, which was excellent. Anybody who hasn't seen it needs to go and see it. I assume it's up on your timeline, on your Twitter timeline.
It's up on Twitter, yes.
Very important segment and very, very well done. And on an extremely important topic. And so just to begin to answer your question about the kind of intersection of the color revolution thesis and the big tech problem that you know and report better than anybody. What is the color revolution thesis? Just briefly, what it is there's been this idea floating around the political sphere for a while, which is true in that there's basically a coup being engineered and targeted against Trump. It started the day he was elected, if not before, and that's absolutely what's been going on. But the color revolution thesis kind of refines that position in a particular way. That is to say, it's not simply a coup, it's a very specific type of coup known as the color revolution regime change model. And once you get to that level of specificity, you're actually playing a different game, because to call it a color revolution suggests that there are very specific strategies and tactics at play, but perhaps more importantly, it suggests that a specific network of people are implicated in this coup. And so very briefly, the distinguishing features of a color revolution regime change model as opposed to any other is typically a combination of an engineered contested election scenario and massive mobilized demonstrations, civil disobedience, which are called, as a term of art, by the way, peaceful protests, quote unquote.
Of course, yeah. I just want to pick up on something you said there briefly. Contested elections, that is what we seem to be barreling towards. And you see the tech giants are even preparing us for them. They're saying they're going to shut down anyone who prematurely claims victory on election night. So
Right.
any narrative that challenges their view of the election result is going to be shut down instantly by Twitter, by Facebook, by all these tech companies.
Exactly. That's exactly true. And just to quickly cap off the color revolution point, it really, because the color revolutions are typically deployed by our national security apparatus to effect regime change in Eastern European countries, this explains why it's all the same people who have or have had bureaucratic positions related to Eastern Europe are the key figures in this effort to undermine and overthrow Trump through the impeachment process and everywhere else. And so it's a specific network of people. And as you correctly point out, censorship is absolutely part of the coup. And in fact, in the color revolution model, there's very specific carve-outs to say that they need to control the information space in the target regime. Usually in Eastern Europe, this is done through, the careful cultivation of NGO media outlets who are there in order to basically purvey whatever narrative is favorable to the color revolution effort. In this case, you have basically total control over every single big tech organ, and so the pieces are in place very well in that respect for the color revolution operatives. And in fact, you can even get into specific people. If you look at the people in the trust and safety boards, if you look at this kind of incestuous relationship.
That's the trust and safety boards of these social media companies. They're the people who run the censorship algorithms, correct?
Exactly. And they're the same people. Look at their biographies. They typically have a history within the national security apparatus, and specifically within the Obama administration's national security apparatus. And in almost every case, what the bigger story is simply Obama national security people being rolled over into this, effectively this shadow government in the trust and safety boards and various positions of influence within the various big tech companies in order to.
We did a story on this a while back. One of the Facebook misinformation officers, so one of the people who determines what is misinformation and what gets censored on Facebook, she worked for the CIA for over 10 years under John Brennan. Not only that, it was a double whammy. So we found the CIA history on her LinkedIn profile, but we also saw a banner, a Black Lives Matter banner at the top of it. So it's the woke deep state, isn't it?
No, it really is. It really is. And it suggests this new paradigm that however difficult it may be, conservatives simply have to suggest. Now, it's taken some time, but I think through the voice of people like Tucker and others, and to some degree, President Donald Trump, conservatives have, as it were, updated their software to reflect the fact that the corporate institutions as such are not necessarily on their side. The whole kind of free market framework that they have, there's a lot of truth to it, but it doesn't mean that these big multinational corporations are the good guys simply because they're in the private sector. That simple reality, to accept that and to have that update, took some time. And I think there's another, perhaps more difficult update that we all have to face, and that is that so many elements within our own security apparatus, our national security apparatus, from the FBI to the CIA to the DOJ, and even the upper brass of the military, are not necessarily on the side of conservatives or even the American people. And I think one point of profound overlap between the color revolution thesis and the story that you tell so well about big tech is that you're missing the most important part of the story if you try to frame it in the typical terms of left and right and just have it dissolve into the old bread and circuses of our clownish political discourse.
You're absolutely right. And the way I frame it in the book is this is global elites trying to maintain their power. This isn't about left or right. This is about the powerful versus the powerless. And the internet gave power to the powerless. That's why they had to take internet freedom away.
That's
And
exactly
you know,
true.
one of the things I've talked to a lot of Silicon Valley sources in the book, but I also talked to one government source who works in the federal government, and he's been following all this stuff for a while. And what he told me was quite terrifying. He said that in the Obama administration, Western elites saw internet freedom as a means to regime, institute regime changes abroad. But when the Trump movement came along, when Brexit came along, they suddenly realized, oh no, these technologies that allow the unpredictable emergence of political movements, they threaten our power. They could regime change us. So that was when Western elites turned against internet freedom.
It's absolutely true. And it fits within this whole kind of idea of the open society, the sort of George Soros framework is it's asymmetrical. It's an open society only for the target regimes. It's not supposed to be an open society for us. It's similar. It's like it's an open relationship, but only in one direction. And it shows that the whole open society is part and parcel of the color revolution models. You get a target society open up. You implant a bunch of NGOs in there, and they're set in place from point of view of the media, from the point of view of mass mobilization and so forth, to target your regime with the color revolution model. And the internet is the same way. The open internet was, great when you had people like Jared Cohen, for instance. For your viewers, I'm sure you know all about it, but just to quickly, Jared Cohen, the top guy in Google's Jigsaw program, he used to be one of these quote unquote deep state types. He's a veteran of Hillary Clinton's State Department and so forth. He's been running the Perspective AI program for Google, which is effectively an AI tool designed to censor domestic political speech online. And so what we're getting at with this idea that, the national security apparatus, they're not these patriotic GI Joes in the imagination of, Reagan-loving boomers. That's not the reality anymore. The reality is that broad swaths, if not the majority of the national security apparatus at the highest level has been compromised. And a result of that is that so many of these national security tools, which were originally designed to target our foreign adversaries, are now being repurposed to suppress the energies associated with Brexit and the victory of Donald Trump. And the internet is ground zero for this operation, is that all of these cybersecurity people, these quote unquote disinformation people, if you go on Twitter, you look at someone's profile, if they have disinformation in their profile, 99.999% chance there's one of these spook operators whose sole job it is to suppress the revolt of the American people against their corrupt elites.
General Stanley McChrystal, in fact, runs one of the biggest anti-disinformation operations. And by the way, if you guys have questions about this, please post them in the chat, and we'll get to them. So go ahead there.
In fact, on Stanley McChrystal, that you bring up a great point. There's a piece just kind of set up in order to kind of facilitate and to help the conversation in conjunction with your Tucker appearance. There's a piece on Revolver.news about Stanley McChrystal, who is in the news today because he endorsed Biden. He's a guy who is, Afghanistan general. He's involved in a lot of shady stuff. If you look at Michael Hastings, who died under very mysterious circumstances, it's a weird thing. But Stanley McChrystal was advising a company that precisely redeployed AI information warfare tools originally designed to go against ISIS, redeploying this technology to use against Trump supporters in America. It's like there's this old trope of the American security state accusing foreign adversaries of, using weapons on their own people. That's been a trope for a long time, when in fact this is exactly what's going on in America, is all of these national security tools that were designed for other purposes, to go after ISIS, to go after, Eastern European, authoritarians and so forth, they're being redeployed in order to suppress populism, conservatism, nationalism, because those, to our corrupt ruling class, represent the number one threat more than anyone else. And we need to respond accordingly. Just as our corrupt ruling class thinks of the populist energies as the number one threat, so do we have to think of these people as our number one threat. It's not China, it's not Russia, it's not anything else. The number one threat to the American people is the corrupt ruling class that controls America. And they do it through censorship.
You bring up China. One of the points I often make is that, we think China is the only country with a so-called social credit system where you're ranked and scored and punished based on your conformity with the values of the ruling elite. But that's exactly what Silicon Valley has built.
Right.
If your values don't conform with theirs, they're going to suppress you. They're going to suppress your political movement. They might even rob you of your livelihood. Even. And this is all quantified. So everything you post on social media, every website you create, every link you share, it's being scored and ranked by these Silicon Valley algorithms. And because it's done by algorithms, there's no escape from it. It happens to everyone, to everything we post. And the way your posts are being scored, the way your websites are being scored, what determines, page 1 of Google versus page 100 of Google is now Silicon Valley's values. Are you posting hate speech? Are you posting so-called misinformation? Are you posting so-called conspiracy theories? All these made-up phrases they've used to suppress political opposition. And if you do that enough, your score will go right down. You'll be disappeared from the internet. That seems to me is exactly the same as a Chinese social credit system. It's punishing people, removing them from services because of their political views.
No, it's true. And I sometimes cynically say I'm not a fan of China at all. I think what they're doing is terrible. And I think it's terrible that we're moving in their direction. And apart from your reporting, which is bar none the best reporting on internet tech censorship, there is a piece, curiously enough, in the Atlantic, and it's actually very favorable to the development whereby we're getting more like China. But just as in terms of chronicling this development of the internet and the increasing censorship of the internet, it's actually a very good piece, very disturbing, and I think people should read it. It's called "Internet Speech Will Never Go Back to Normal" by Jack Goldsmith. And it says, in the debate over freedom versus control of the global network, China was largely correct and the US was wrong. Not necessarily something we agree with, but everyone should read that because it gets to this point. What's happening is we're converging with China when it comes to internet censorship. And this brings up so many bigger questions about the nature of the society that we live in. And, because China doesn't pretend to be this free and open society, whereas we do. The whole idea that we live in a democracy, a place where free speech thrives, is really kind of put to lie with the fact that the people who control this country are so terrified of there being a forum for free and open discussion. It's almost as though the society that we live in, as it's currently constructed, is built on such fragile lies that it is not compatible with the type of free and open speech that the real internet would provide. And so they simply have to shut it down.
One of the lines in my book is that being right-wing today is simply about noticing things you're not supposed to. And this gets to the heart of so-called machine learning fairness. I mean, of course, they call it fairness. Everything they say is the opposite of what it's supposed to mean. It's not about fairness, it's about embedding unfairness. But the point of this field is to take the baseless assumptions of critical race theory, feminism, all these far-left academic fields, and embed them into artificial intelligence, embed them into the algorithms that are going to regulate our political discourse, that are going to regulate almost every aspect of our lives. Let's explain what an algorithm is briefly. An algorithm is simply something that analyzes data, looks at patterns, and spits out conclusions. A truly unbiased algorithm that impartially looked at the data, that impartially reached conclusions, that would be profoundly threatening to the left because it would demolish all their factual assumptions. It would reach some pretty politically incorrect conclusions.
I mean, just to interject quickly on that, and again, I'm sure you know this much more extensively than I do, but there's a whole genre of these kind of woke commissar censors who draw attention to the problem that AI sometimes does actually do its job and it recognizes patterns. And so there's this whole notion, propounded by these people of how they need to make sure that the algorithms don't get too good at noticing certain things. And this whole idea, and of course they explain it by saying, oh, we're imparting our own biases into the algorithms, but in fact when you look at some of the cases, it's not exactly what they characterize it as. So they need to, by training the algorithms to be woke, in a way they have to train the algorithms not to actually recognize real patterns in the world.
Yeah, it's really insidious. If you go and look at the literature on machine learning fairness, it's framed in terms of we have to combat bias. What it's really about is embedding their own biases in these technologies.
Exactly. Right.
And we're laughing about it now, but the fact of the matter is these completely crazy people, and very racist people, by the way, they all believe in critical race theory. These people are in charge of the technologies that are moderating political opinion, moderating political speech, not just in America, but in Brazil, in Italy, in France, in Germany. Never before has this much power over political discourse been in the hands of so few people. And they're all lunatics. They all believe in critical race theory. These are the people who are running democracy around the world now, running political speech.
Right. And I think one thing to point out in conjunction with that is that if you look at the people in charge of, the trust and safety boards, if you look at the people who really kind of drive the political narrative, there could be exceptions, but my general impression is they're not necessarily computer geniuses themselves. The people who are actually really intelligent, design the software. I mean, the whole challenge of being able to have a woke algorithm that's sensitive to the nuances of natural language and therefore can censor any attempt to kind of circumvent their blacklist. That whole challenge is really a subset of a more kind of general sort of body of natural language research that's being done in large degree by smart and legitimate people. And so it's really the people directing the kind of the woke activities. They're not even necessarily, or at least in every case, like the top people at these companies. They're not the brilliant computer engineers. They're just like these commissar, these uneducated, in many cases not even that educated people who, because of the weakness of everyone else, are able to thrust themselves in a position where they dictate how this powerful software is implemented. I think that's the most remarkable part of it, is that these are not like, I would love to have more evil geniuses, because at least it kind of dignifies the battle that we're in. But to see all these people who are really kind of mediocre in the mind, to say, to put it generously, and who are not the best looking people either, not that that matters, but people who are just low quality all around, being in a position to dictate how this powerful software, this machine learning software, is used. It's just so pathetic and so undignified, and it really just lends a certain kind of sordid character to this struggle that we're in. We deserve better enemies than these.
Yeah, the people who have been handed the digital keys to the kingdom, so to speak, are the graduates of Berkeley gender studies courses. It's comical if it wasn't so scary, if it wasn't so threatening to American democracy and freedom. And let's talk a little bit about how these technologies actually work, how these companies are able to censor entire movements at the same time. So, one of the things I've discovered is when a big account gets banned, everyone who followed that account is automatically downgraded in the algorithm, because if you follow an account known for posting hate speech, that's going to affect your hidden quality ranking as well. That's Silicon Valley's term for its social credit scores. So that's really a formula, not just for censoring one or two people, but for censoring entire movements at the same time. First you behead the movement, and then you suppress all the followers of the people that you just banned. And what's more, like you mentioned, natural language processing. That's covered in the book as well, by the way. I've got a whole chapter on this and how it fits into internet anonymity. But natural language processing is an incredibly sophisticated way to identify certain groups of people based on the kind of language they use, the kind of issues they talk about, the kind of websites they link to. And that, again, allows these companies to pinpoint with really precise detail who the Trump supporters are, who the populists are, who the left-wingers are, who the supporters of the establishment are. And then they use that knowledge to artificially promote the people on their side and artificially suppress the people who are threatening to the establishment. So I often say, we had unprecedented freedom when we had an actually open and free internet, but now that's been replaced with unprecedented tyranny. That's why I'm talking about digital totalitarianism. It genuinely is a threat to freedom and democracy that hasn't been seen before.
Right. Actually, like, it's, all of these things are so interesting and so important on the kind of first order level. But there's so many second order questions that they raise. For instance, the thing about, like, what kind of society that we live in that must be based on such fragile lies that it's not compatible with free and open discussion that that the internet would facilitate. Another consideration is simply that, given the tools that are already at the disposal of our ruling class, the fact that there's really any free speech at all, I think speaks to the surprisingly profound incompetence of ruling class. For instance, if I had the disposal of these tools and I wanted to use them in a certain way, there would be no speech on the other side. And it surprises me sometimes just how sloppy and lazy the commissars are and how ineffective they are given the power of the tools that they actually have at their disposal. And so, in some weird kind of cynical way, our saving grace might be the fact that the United States has collapsed so much in terms of its education level, in terms of its ability to channel talent, and the fact that it just elevates really dumb and mediocre people into positions of power, is that, notwithstanding the fact that they have these very dangerous tools at their disposal, they might just be too incompetent. The country might just be too incompetent at this point to impose the type of tyranny that you see developing in China. So the incompetence of this kind of joke country might actually be the saving grace in terms of saving us from the kind of tyranny that looks like China is developing into.
Well, that's quite a combination there, a black pill and a white pill at the same time. Someone in the chat actually just mentioned, that we've been demoralized. And I want to inject a glimmer of hope into the discussion here. That's one way to do it. But also, there is a bit of a glimmer of hope in the Trump administration, right?
Yeah.
Because while the first half of the administration, the deep state was sabotaging everyone, we've started to see some really good people being appointed to positions of influence where they can actually affect policy on big tech.
Right.
Adam Kandayev comes to mind. And this new FCC commissioner, Nathan Symington, I'm hearing good things about him. So I do get the sense that if Donald Trump wins a second term, something might actually be done about tech censorship. But I also get the sense that this is kind of the last chance, because no other world leader and no other major political figure in the US seems to be as take the issue as seriously, or at least instinctively take it seriously as Donald Trump does. There are a few Republican senators who seem to get it as well. But if Joe Biden gets into office, he's going to use the federal government to pressure these tech companies to do even more censorship, to clamp down even more, and that'll really be the end. I mean, there'll be absolutely no more free discourse on the internet. There'll be no way to get around the narrative. What do you think about that? Do you think this is the last chance, this election?
Well, I guess I never think it's a last chance for anything. I think there's always a way. I think it's certainly much better if Trump wins than if Biden wins from multiple standpoints. But I think particularly from the standpoint of censorship, partly because under Biden, you would have a very aggressive push to kind of tie up the loose ends that exist in terms of people being able to speak their minds online. And as you point out, Trump actually has been very good as of late in terms of pushing good people into key positions who would be responsible for pushing back against censorship. So I think there is definitely hope on both sides, and I would expect that if Trump gets to a second term, if he keeps the people that you mentioned and continues on his kind of trajectory of getting serious in terms of personnel, I think there's a lot that could be done. I don't think the president himself single-handedly just can't do it all. He can do a lot, but he can't do it all. I think there needs to be kind of a broader consensus, a broader convergence among people on the right, among conservatives. There's still people on the right who have this ridiculous idea that we shouldn't do anything because these are private companies. There's so much
just
work.
build your own argument. Yes, we've all heard this before. It's crazy.
It's so ridiculous, and people just need to get serious about. Google has more power than arguably any institution in the world. Everything is an information war. You have these, again, even it's not only the kind of the specific type of libertarian or whatever says, oh, they're private companies, we can't do anything, we're willing to have our tongues ripped out of our mouths so long as it's done by a private company. It's not just those people who are ridiculous. I see, and again, I want to put it delicately because I'm a big Second Amendment guy. I think Second Amendment is very important, but I do see a lot of people, conservatives say, oh, we as long as we have our guns, so long as we have our Second Amendment, guns are nowhere near as important as having free speech, having free internet. It's just there's no comparison, and that's just a subset of the basic reality that even in terms of national power, national projection, the power of the United States is its information dominance more than anything. That's certainly its power domestically, and control over information flows, winning the narrative war, winning the information war. Information war is everything, and unless you control distribution of information, you're not going to get anywhere. It's just not going to happen. It is,
and Silicon Valley can control it invisibly. I mean,
right.
In the Soviet Union, at least you knew who the commissars were. They all wear their uniforms. Right. But this is all happening imperceptibly. We're being censored without even realizing it.
Right.
Like I said, we can see the bans. We can see the bans on big figures. What we can't see is what's going on behind the scenes. This is what my sources talk about in the book. The changes they've made to algorithms to suppress entire political movements, to suppress, in the words of one Twitter employee, suppress entire ways of talking. Right. That's a really terrifying thing about tech censorship, I think.
So true.
I just want to move on quickly to policy solutions. We both agree, I think, that there needs to be policy solutions. I've always been of the view that competitors are good, competition is good. I support Gab, I support Parler. They're not going to replace the tech giants anytime soon, but it's good that they're there. It's good that DuckDuckGo is there as well. But you really need to fix the problem industry-wide standards. And the one I've always settled on is opt-outs for users. So Google for a long time has had a safe search button in the top right-hand corner of the screen, and you can turn that off or on whether you want to filter obscene results or not. That seems entirely reasonable.
Right.
But they haven't given users that option when it comes to misinformation or hate speech or fake news. We know they have the technology. We know they could do that, but they've chosen not to because they want to retain control over information.
Right.
My opinion is that if you want to have the protections of Section 230, those all-important legal liabilities, you have to allow users to opt out of your filters on constitutionally protected speech, whatever that speech may be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a great solution if it would be implemented. I think that and so that that's a great solution. All the the constellation of kind of Section 230 approaches are good. Opt out is good. I tend to think in terms of what are the actual bottlenecks, because in terms of what would it take to actually implement that? There could be a Section 230 leverage, but of course, Google's not going to want to do that, precisely because it's not even just Google. It's, if you understand kind of the broader context of what we're talking about, it's almost wrong when people say Google's a private. When you get to the level of Google, there's no distinction between public and private. There's such an integration between the national security, the military industrial apparatus, and the tech apparatus. You can't separate the two. And so to call it either public or private is really to miss the point of what it is.
I have an article on this just today, actually. The fact that Eric Schmidt, who ran Google for over a decade, I think, sat on a Pentagon Advisory Council up until September of this year. The Trump administration didn't even remove him, and Google still has all of its people on that same Pentagon Advisory Board. So you're absolutely right.
And of course they would be on there because look, it's, of course they would be on the advisory board because a company of Google's stature simply cannot be extricated from the United States government, from the security state apparatus. It simply couldn't be done. It couldn't be allowed to be done. I think, by the way, Reid Hoffman is also involved in that. But so there are a lot of these characters. But I think the reason I point this out is because I want to get, I don't mean to be demoralizing, but I think looking clearly at the nature of the problem, what the bottlenecks actually are, understanding that at this high level, there is no public-private distinction. There's an integration, and it's not just an issue, I think, of some woke people on the trust and safety boards. That is a lot of it, but there's this other dimension that's connected with the color revolution aspect, and that is that there is a deep sentiment within our own national security apparatus that the energies associated with Trump's victory are deeply dangerous, and they'll do everything they can to suppress it. They'll do everything they can to prevent the American electorate from meddling in their elections again. And just today, you saw a former top-level FBI guy saying that the FBI and should have the power to vet presidential candidates. And so once you kind of understand that, where the resistance is coming from, where the bottlenecks are coming from, I think we should definitely go hard on Section 230. I love your idea about the opt-out, but it needs to be in conjunction with a longer-term strategy of, again, conservatives, to the extent that they focus on stuff, the resource allocation is just so heartbreakingly bad for conservatives. They need to be cultivating networks of people, talented people, who will be funneled into these companies who can pose resistance from the inside. Of course, you need good people to reach the people already in there to hopefully persuade them, convince them to do the right thing. But you need the next generation of talent. There should be fellowships funded by right-wing people to identify the most talented people in computer science and get them when they're in high school age, when they're younger. Sponsor contests, sponsor computer science Olympiad type contests, and have it in conjunction with sort of a fellowship program whereby they read stuff like your book. They read things that give them a sense of the responsibility that they have if they're going into a career of developing these types of tools, and set up a fellowship network. All of these, like these cadre development, network development, talent recruitment, these things need to be done. There needs to be billions of dollars spent on this instead of the big conservative donors, instead of writing a check and flushing it down the toilet by giving it to the Heritage Foundation. People need to be thinking in these terms. What are we going to do to build an army of talented people who are going to be the next tech moguls, the people designing the software, the people who could call the shots at these companies and infiltrate it? What are we doing to develop that type of cadre? And it doesn't seem like we're doing much at all, if anything.
And if there are, on the off chance there's any Heritage donor watching at the moment, you should know Heritage doesn't just take your money, they take Google's money as well. And that's why they're constantly defending them against any attempt to push back against tech tyranny. I think we'll probably leave it there. But Darren, before you go, I think you have a big scoop coming out next week on Revolver News about
yes,
tech
there's
and the
there's
revolution.
going to be, so all of the color revolution pieces you mentioned, there's so far a trilogy on revolver.news. The president endorsed revolver.news as the new Drudge Report. So if you don't like Drudge Report, start going to Revolver. The president says it's great, but it is great. And go there next week in particular. But really, there's going to be a running series all the way to the election, maybe after. But next week, there's going to be a Start Color Revolution series specifically related to some things going on in censorship, and to illustrate what we've been talking about as to how censorship is part of the coup. You know, people need to know that censorship is part of the coup. I keep saying they're going to do everything they can to prevent you from meddling your own elections again. That line, that idea came to me when watching that incredible video that you broke, the video of the entire Google C-suite right after the election, just in tears, having a hug session because they were so devastated by Trump's victory. This is the most powerful company in the world, having a hug session immediately after Trump wins. That's very disturbing.
And
And
it
if
was
you,
very sinister. They started talking about that same program you mentioned, Jigsaw, the
yeah,
counter-extremism program. They were talking about that in the context of the Trump movement, and they were talking about that 4 years ago, right
no,
after he won. They spent the four
it's
years
so,
since then killing
it's
the Trump movement,
so,
doing everything
so
they can to make sure he doesn't get reelected.
it's so sinister. We should probably do a separate thing just about Jigsaw, because it's so insane. When you hear about it, it's going to blow your mind. This interesting character, Jared Cohen. Now, I'm not hugely endorsing Assange. I think what happened was very unfair. He should probably be pardoned. But he wrote a very, very good piece on Jared Cohen. It's on WikiLeaks. Everyone should read it because Assange is actually a great writer. I never thought he'd be a great writer. He's a great writer. He eviscerates Jared Cohen, but this guy Jared Cohen, close associate of Eric Schmidt and these others, he's a veteran of both Bush and Hillary's State Department. He was characterized by Stratfor, the private intelligence agency, as Google's regime change expert. And his whole purpose was he couldn't do some things in his official capacity in the State Department, so they put him in Google, where he had more flexibility, and he did all this kind of stuff involving the intersection of digital technology and regime change, going after terrorists, going after various dangerous groups in the Middle East. And his new role is to oversee the development of AI tools designed to censor domestic speech in America.
There you have it. It really is terrifying. And by the way, I always say Americans have a huge responsibility here, because these tech giants aren't simply a threat to democracy here at home, here in America, but to Brazil, to Italy, to Europe, to Germany, to France, every country where these tech companies are dominant. Their influence is felt on the political discourse. So I don't think there's a more important battle for Americans to be fighting right now. But anyway, we'll leave it there, but we'll certainly have another discussion in the future. Thanks, Darren.
Thank you all.